Right. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Judicial Proceedings Committee. Today is Thursday, January 18th, 2024. Welcome to our third briefing of four. Today's briefing is on the contributing factors of chronic absenteeism and truancy in Maryland public school system, and maybe some of the overlaps and corollaries to justice-involved youth. But also just analyzing and trying to understand the prevalence of chronic absenteeism and truancy, especially after the pandemic. And so we were joined by a very distinguished panel. We really appreciate your time. You all have very important jobs and important work to do, supporting and educating our youth in Maryland. And so we really do appreciate you all taking the time to be here with us and to share some knowledge. And I think the information, I've looked through the slides, the information you're going to share with us, I think is going to be a great benefit to the committee, but also to the General Assembly at large, and also to the general public. This information will all be accessible online to the general public for time immemorial. So we really do appreciate all the work you put into producing those materials for us. So first we'll hear from the Maryland State Department of Education, and then I'll read off the panelists when I bring you up. We'll then hear from the Maryland State Education Association, the Maryland Judiciary, and then an organization called Attendance Works. So without further delay, we'll bring up the Maryland State Department of Education. We'll have Carrie Wright, Clarence Crawford, and Dr. Joshua Michael. If you all would come on up, we can begin the presentation. And whoever the individual responsible for speaking, we just have to come up to the podium. The entire panel can come on up if you're comfortable doing so. But if you could come in when you're speaking, if you come to the podium so that both sides of the committee can see you. Thank you all very much and welcome. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. I want to thank Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the Judicial Proceedings Committee. On behalf of the Maryland State Board of Education, we appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. I believe this is my first opportunity to be able to spend time with you. My name is Clarence Crawford, and I serve as the president of the Maryland State Board of Education. I am in my fourth and final year in that role. It has been a true honor and a privilege to be involved with public education, especially when you consider all of the issues and challenges that we have. You know, addressing absenteeism, chronic absenteeism, is absolutely critical if we are really serious about graduating children who are prepared for life. About 55 plus years ago, I was likely one of those children. As I mentioned in yesterday's hearing, I have dyslexia, and I graduated high school in DC in 1969, unable to read. By the grace of God and by having a strong support network of family and friends, and the determination and discipline, I was able to turn that around. One of my first jobs was as a DC police officer. So I have lived chronic absenteeism as a student, and I've seen the effects of chronic absenteeism as a police officer. I'm pleased to be here today with our interim state superintendent, Dr. Carrie Wright, and our vice president, Dr. Joshua Michael. Dr. Wright is going to share more information about this important matter in just a couple of minutes. Our board is deeply committed to creating transformative educational opportunities and outcomes for all of Maryland's children. That's our resolution 2201, and that has been our North Star over the past couple of years. We believe the blueprint and our strategy are excellent vehicles for helping to achieve this goal. You know, as you look at the various policy implementation matters, it's clear to us that students need to be present and engaged in school to be able to learn. It's through this lens that Dr. Wright and myself are here today to just share some thoughts and information and actions that are underway to begin to address this matter. To be very clear, chronic absenteeism is a significant concern of the State Board, and it will continue to be one of our priorities going forward. As you know, COVID has caused major changes in our society, and our schools are not exempt from that. So we're very concerned about the growth of chronic absenteeism, especially in the wake of the pandemic. This challenge is not a Maryland unique challenge. This is a nationwide challenge, and we see increases nationwide. The impact of this chronic absenteeism not only affects the students, but also the school systems. Research has shown that chronic absenteeism has a far-reaching impact. It impacts test scores, grades, children's ability to be able to graduate, and also it increases the likelihood of engagement with the criminal justice system. Chronic absenteeism can adversely impact a child for a lifetime. We're not just looking at chronic absenteeism in high school and middle school. The data shows that you begin to see these kinds of issues with our youngest learners. So beginning to figure out how to address this issue and recognize that it is a systemic problem. Dr. Wright will be up to share more information about the matter. She will share some examples of what's going on in Maryland, and then also talk about some opportunities to apply the lessons learned more broadly. The State Board is committed, and the superintendent are committed to working with members of this committee and with other stakeholders to really address this problem. We're committed to leveraging Blueprint and other available resources and initiatives, such as leveraging the full implementation of the community schools to provide more holistic approach. We've been out to visit community schools, and one of the questions we ask them is, does it work? And they point to increased attendance. They point to increased academic performance. So again, taking initiatives like that and then figuring out how we can fully implement them for the benefit of our children. With that, I want to turn the time over to Dr. Wright. Dr. Wright, when you come up, if you could just share a little bit about your background, and we are thrilled to have her here as our interim superintendent. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to answer any questions after Dr. Wright. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Crawford. And before we hear from Dr. Wright, just really quickly, I wanted to take some time to acknowledge that we were joined by Senator Washington, a JPR alum, but now on a different committee. This subject matter on EEE, on education, environment, and energy, this committee doesn't deal with this subject matter often. And so the committee's been invited to help us and to kind of cross-pollinate. And I think it's an important conversation for us to have here, because too often we deal with the ex post, like something has happened, and so how much time do you get, and what are the repercussions? And so it's good for us to kind of turn towards a more proactive approach and understand things that are preventative. And so I think this is a very good conversation for us to have, and we're delighted to have Senator Washington join us. And Senator Washington, if you'd like to say something, go ahead, and then we'll get on with it.
Quickly, thank you so much for the invitation. Here representing the Education, Energy, Environment Committee. I am the Education Subcommittee Chair. We'll be joined, we have another hearing, of course, but they'll be joined by another member of the Education Subcommittee. And I think this is one of the first times that we've interacted in this way. And I think these two committees, really have a lot of opportunity to work together to provide the best for all of our young people, as well as the state of Maryland. And I look forward to twice in 1 week hearing from our state board and welcoming our brand new superintendent. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you and good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I will be brief. I am a Marylander for all of my life, except for that little stint I spent in Mississippi. But I went to the University of Maryland, graduated all 3 degrees from the University of Maryland, started my teaching in Prince George's County, then moved to Howard County, was a teacher, principal, assistant principal, director of special ed and student services, went to Montgomery County, served as associate superintendent there of special ed and student services, then went to the District of Columbia Public Schools for a few years as the chief academic officer. And from there, went to Maryland, Mississippi, where I was the state chief for 9 years. So happy to be here, happy to be in this interim role. This is work I love, and it's from my heart. So hope to provide you with lots of information today. And so thank you for having me. We've got a lot to give you. We're going to go over some definitions so that we're clear about the difference between truancy and chronic absenteeism, et cetera. We're also very blessed to have, we call this the bright spot that you're going to be talking about today, that we've got a principal that's who's done amazing things at her school, Lori Spence. And so Lori Phelps, and she's going to be speaking to you. She's the principal at Woodbridge Elementary in Baltimore County. And then my very dear friends from Attendance Works, we have been partners for a number of years, is going to be speaking to you. So this is something that we all, hopefully you're all speaking the same language. So I'll start with that. Now you did say that this would move if I move these buttons here. What am I doing? This isn't wanting to move. No. I don't know how to get it to advance. Somebody's coming to help me. Thank you. I've hit every arrow I know to hit. So there you go. Oh, good. I was hitting the right arrows. That's perfect. That is.
It does that.
Are we good?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Look, I know what I know. I know enough to know what I don't know, and where you get the experts. That's exactly right. All right. So we'll talk about some definitions. I'm going to show you some data around trends, and then we'll turn this over to Principal Phelps to talk to you about her school and then what the department is doing. So attendance, simply as you would think it would be, refers to when a student is either present or absent from an instructional program. And that's either part of the day for any reason other than a lawful absence. So we're still talking about attendance here, is presumed to be unlawful. And so lawful absences, as you can imagine, include family, illness, pregnancy, doctor's appointments, work, observance of a religious holiday, et cetera, et cetera. Even a suspension is considered a lawful absence. We collect these data 3 times a year, fall, spring, and at the end of the year. Now, chronic absenteeism is a little different. Chronic absenteeism is when children miss 10% or more of their school days. So if you have 180 days in a school year, you're talking about 18 days or more of absence. And the important thing to think about with chronic absenteeism is that chronic absenteeism counts both lawful and unlawful absences. So that's a distinction that I don't think a lot of people have really kind of leaned into. Truancy, however, is defined as a student who is unlawfully absent from school more than 8 days in a quarter, 15 days in a semester, or 20 days in a school year. Now, lots of research down at the bottom of this slide, but to talk about why is even coming to school important? Well, obviously, children that have higher attendance, obviously have higher outcomes. Preschoolers who have higher attendance have higher kindergarten readiness skills and 3rd grade skills, particularly for African-American children and children in poverty. And the interesting part about this that you'll see in the data, President Crawford referred to it, we have a lot of children who are chronically absent in very young grades. And that's a real concern, particularly when you're thinking that they're starting their educational career. Elementary and middle school students have higher attendance and higher academic GPAs. Students with lower attendance, obviously, will have higher course failure and more dropout rates. There's also a link, if you will, to poorer social skills, higher unemployment, and higher engagement in healthy, risky behaviors, as well as juvenile behaviors. So here's the trends since 2016. The blue line is elementary. The orange line is middle school and the green line is high school. So this is strictly this attendance as you're looking at it is on your left, and chronic absenteeism, as you can see, is on the right. And you will all notice that it has spiked since 2020 when we went through COVID. And it has continued to spike up until this past year, which seems to dip a little, but not nearly where we need chronic absenteeism rates to be. So I wanted to kind of give you a picture of, this is just strictly attendance data by subgroup. And you can see that Asian and white students have higher attendance rates, and Black, African American, Hispanic, and the special service groups that you see over to the side all have lower attendance rates. This is chronic absenteeism by subgroup. So you can see, once again, Asian and white students have lower rates of chronic absenteeism, whereas Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, and special service groups have the highest rates of chronic absenteeism. Once again, remember, missing 10% or more of the school year. I wanted to give this slide to you to kind of, guys, I know you all are coming from all across the state, to give you an idea of where your district, your state, your county data reside. And I'll give you just a second to study that. This is by LEA. And you can see that the attendance rates, once again, range from 83 to 94%. This is chronic absenteeism by county. And the reason it's important, I'll tell you just a little anecdote that I had happen to me in Mississippi. I had a superintendent that called me and questioned his chronic absenteeism rate for one of his high schools. And he said, that's way too high. And I said, what do you mean? I think it was around 45%, to believe it or not. And he said, well, my attendance rate is at 95%, so this can't be the case. Well, yeah, it can be the case. I said, because chronic absenteeism is calculated differently than absenteeism is calculated. And so I said, and plus you were the one that gave us the data. So we had to use your data in calculating both attendance and chronic absenteeism. So I think it's really important to make that distinction. This is by grade. This is attendance rates at the top. And then if you look at the chronic absenteeism rate, look at kindergarten. And we found the same thing, to be honest with you, happening in Mississippi, because not everybody was viewing kindergarten as the beginning of school. And so I think it's really important that this is where the learning begins, and we need these little ones in every single day. So we followed a cohort here, and we from a 2016 grade 3 students, and we followed them through till they were in grade 10. And we just followed 2 buckets, those that were chronically absent and those that were not chronically absent. And you can see that those that were chronically absent certainly became more so as time went on. And those that were not chronically absent, although there was the dip, once again, you're going to notice between the 2021-22 school year really kind of leveled off, whereas the other children continued to be chronically absent. This is another cohort that we followed, not chronically absent versus chronically absent over 10 years. And you can see that the big difference in chronic absenteeism really exacerbates itself by the time you get out to 2023. So we were asked the other day, do you have a way to look at this based on how the schools are rated? You know, Maryland has a star rating system. 1 is the lowest, 5 is the highest. And so we overlaid the attendance rate with school ratings. And you can very well see that the attendance rates are higher in your 5-star rating schools than they are in your 1-star rating schools. And the same is true, the inverse is true for chronic absenteeism. Their chronic absenteeism rates are higher in your 1-star rated schools than they are in your 5-star rated schools. So truancy, remember, that's who's unlawfully absent, you know, days in a quarter, days in a semester, days in a school year. This kind of bounced along at about 2 or 3% until COVID hit. And then it bounced up to almost 10%. And you can see that it's come down, but certainly not near where we need those numbers to be. So I'm going to give you this picture. This is Woodbridge Elementary, and this is the principal you're going to hear from now. And then I'll come back up and finish the slides. But this will give you an idea and a perspective on what her school looks like demographically. And I'm going to turn this over to Principal Phelps, and I'll be back.
Thank you. So what you've really just heard is that macro piece. Thank you. You've heard that macro piece, so now you're going to hear micro, right? More micro than you possibly ever wanted to know about one of the approximately 1,300 Maryland schools. So this is what we do in my school. And you can see from the slide, we're very diverse. I'm located in the Catonsville area of Baltimore County, which is right down the road from the Islamic Society. We are 44% Asian. We are 27% African American, and only about that 6 to 7% white. So, and we have a very growing Hispanic community as well. We're over a third English language learners. Which, as I talk about attendance, that group presents its own particular challenges. So I was asked, what is it that we did that decreased our chronic absenteeism? We went from about 28% last year to 9.2. That's one of the lowest chronic absenteeism rates in the state, and we're very proud of it. We've been working on it for a long time. There is no magic button to push that is going to change chronic absenteeism overnight. It is an expectation game and an education game, mostly for parents. So what do? It starts with prioritizing. Obviously, we all want to prioritize those very important state scores, but we made a decision 2 years ago to prioritize attendance. And because we know if I get the children in school, then the teachers can teach them. We meet weekly. And when I say we meet weekly, I mean it's 10 o'clock Tuesday and we are having an attendance meeting. The attendance committee consists of the school counselor, the assistant principal, myself, the school social worker, and in Baltimore County, we have what's called a pupil personnel worker. I'm sure every county has someone like that, that is an outside the school person, a central office-based person who is that trained person that goes and does a lot of knocking on doors. And so she attends weekly as well. We maintain our own attendance records. I can print anything I need off of our county records, but I can tell you every single day which of my students are currently chronically absent. As Dr. Wright was explaining, chronic absence is defined as 10% of the available days of school. And what we start explaining to parents at the end of September, we already have chronically absent students. If you were on a late vacation and you didn't start school on time, you came back chronically absent because you've already missed 2 days of school and there are only 20 days in September and we don't even go all 20 of those. And so you start the year chronically absent. Parents don't understand that. Until it's said repeatedly. It's like a commercial, right? You have to say it 7 times before it starts penetrating. So it is something that we say to parents directly. We say it at back to school night. We put it in the school newsletter. You can't walk into Woodbridge without hearing about how important attendance is. We have been very successful in identifying patterns of attendance. I'm going to give you just some samples of what could cause someone to be chronically absent. Early dismissal days. There's a pattern. Certain children miss every single early dismissal day. There's a pattern. I can tell you that as of yesterday, when we've only had 2 late arrival days so far this school year, I have 11 of my 452 students who have missed both of them. That's a pattern. Mondays and Fridays. That's a pattern. We have a lot of custody issues in my school. And if you're going to dad's house every other week, he's picking you up on Thursday night. He's probably not bringing you to school on Friday, or vice versa. If the parents live far away, they start their weekends early. So we look for those patterns. Before and after long weekends, we've identified those patterns. Full weeks of absence. People are on vacation. We've identified that pattern. Our weather-related patterns. These are for many of my low-income students that don't have a car when it is cold, snowing, and rainy. I mean, last year we only had 9.2. That's not a coincidence that we didn't have a lot of snow days, right? They came to school because they could walk. It's really cold some days. And so we see a weather-related pattern of chronic absenteeism. We also look for patterns where all children in the same family are absent on the same day. It's very unusual for one child to get sick and then 2 days later, the other child gets sick and then 2 days later, the third child gets sick. Yes. But when all children are always absent on the same day, that is a pattern. And I would simply reinforce what Dr. Wright's data showed you earlier. Kindergarten is a pattern. And I would take it one step further. It is kindergarten parents who have their first child in school. That is the pattern in kindergarten. I can go through my list of chronically absent. Right now, I have 22 of my 452 students who qualify under the definition of chronically absent. More than half of them are in kindergarten. And as I say to the kindergarten parents, when we visit with them at their required parent conference for attendance, it's not a coincidence that kindergarten children are not getting sicker at higher rates in our school building than our 4th and 5th graders. You are keeping them home for different reasons and for longer periods of time. So those are a variety of different patterns. And notice I didn't actually talk about children that were sick in any of those chronically absent attendance patterns. We had a child this year that had his appendix out. He only missed 3 days. How quickly children can return to school after an illness is amazing. And so 18 days is really plenty of time if you're talking about missing school because of illness. It's all the other days that add up to that chronic absenteeism. So I want to just address some of those patterns. So one of the first things that we did on the half days, because when we came back from COVID, you may have heard about these mental health half days that we gave teachers, which were fabulous, but there were 6 of them. And if you didn't come to school on a half day, you've already missed a third of the days that you can miss without being chronically absent. And so when we identified that pattern, our PTA put together an after school program that allowed children to stay in school all day. What we know again is that our parents who are working full days at jobs they just can't take off from to come pick up their child when we have an early dismissal at 12:30. And so they were able to sign up for their child to stay in school until the regular school closing time. The PTA did charge a very small $10 fee, but we even waived that for families that had that list of children. We do very specific letters. So if your child was on that list, you got a letter that said, your child has missed 5 of the last 6 early dismissal days. We encourage you to sign up for this PTA program so that your child no longer needs to miss those days. So that's one way that we solved that problem. Children do want to come to school. We give them reasons to come to school. Again, the early dismissal days, we play music in the cafeteria. Lots of schools do this. Lots and lots of schools have those positive incentives for children. I think the real difference with Woodbridge is, again, the priority that my staff has put on it, that, again, each and every one of us can say, oh, that child's chronically absent. Is so-and-so here today? Because that child's chronically absent. We have it down to such a degree that we can call the parent. My school starts at 8:25. I can call the parent by 9:10 and say, were you bringing Johnny to school today? Because he's chronically absent. Is everything okay? Is there anything we can do? And really being able to follow up on that. Our teachers make chronically absent phone calls. It can be a little bit of a pain, both for teachers and for parents, but we know they work. Again, from my list of chronically absent students, on that list is the name of the teacher. I can tell you which teachers are brand new because they're overwhelmed by their other responsibilities and don't quite get to those attendance phone calls. It is not a coincidence that teachers that are making these phone calls home also have the least number of chronically absent students. When we're calling students, we want you to know we missed you. Look, we noticed you weren't here. We'd really like you to come. So that extra effort on the part of our teachers, our entire staff, has made a huge difference. When we talk about tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3, these are common terms in education. Tier 1 are those terms where everybody gets the same thing. Tier 2 is when you start putting a few things in place, and tier 3 are those really intensive pieces of intervention that you're hoping not more than 5 to 7% of the students in your school need. We do RPCs, required parent conferences. It's a pretty scary letter. that gets sent home. We send it certified because that tells somebody that it's important. We send it in the kid's backpack. We send it regular mail. And then we call and follow up and say, hey, did you get the RPC? We're expecting to see you. We use translators. Again, I have a 1/3 of my population is English language learners. And even though the parents will say, no, they don't need an interpreter, what we have found is that when you're talking about something as important as attendance that uses those legal terminology, we really want to have translators there. So we do bring them in. Parents leave with a copy of the compulsory attendance law. Maryland is a compulsory attendance state. They need to understand that. And as again, what Dr. Wright said, people don't understand that even if you have an excused absence, that number still counts towards your chronically absent number. That is the biggest aha that parents get from us when we have that meeting with them. Like, oh, I didn't know that. And so that helps them understand. Transportation can be very challenging for, again, families that don't have cars and that bad weather. It can be a real barrier toward getting children to school. School refusal. So when we meet with parents, we're able to do problem solving. You know, there are all different reasons for why a child may be chronically absent. Some of it might be school refusal. So it's really important for us to find out from the parent, is the child saying they don't want to come to school? What's wrong? Again, you have your question is, are they being bothered at school? You know, are they saying their stomach hurts, their head hurts? Those kinds of issues then get referred to the school counselor or the school social worker. If a parent tells us they don't have a car and they're not going to send their child in the rain, we look for a parent that lives close by, and I'll call the parent. I've called parents personally and said, would you mind, you know, doing a carpool with the people that live in the apartment 3 doors down because they can't get their children to school on a rainy day? We've successfully set that up several times. And so that has made a difference. We now give parents a list of their child's days that they've been absent. It's called a tracker, and it's very colorful, and it lists you have 17 days, and it lists them all out, and you put the days when you're absent, and when it gets to 18, it says stop. And we tell them, put it on the refrigerator. So after you've already been absent 8 days, you know, you're marking your next days down. So you know how long you have until you are chronically absent. We do letters for everything. We do letters that say, congratulations, your child is no longer chronically absent. And when the child gets off the chronic absence list, they go to the counselor, they get a prize from 5 and below or 10 and below now. And so we celebrate it as well as educate parents and explain it. So those are some of the things that we have done at Woodbridge that has reduced our chronic absenteeism from 28% to 9.2%.
And now you know why we had her come. She is to be congratulated. One of the things that was Hetty Chang, who heads up, she's the executive director for attendance work, very good friend, and just a huge, huge advocate for partnering with states and districts around the whole issue of chronic absenteeism. She was really zeroing in on something that I think the principal was talking about earlier, and that's like the school climate. You know, how are children feeling when they get to school? Are they feeling like it's a safe place? Are they feeling welcomed? Is somebody even acknowledging their name when they walk through the door? You'd be amazed at how small those things are, but people respond to that. And one of the things that she was commenting on, and she says, do I make sure, a question that she would put to herself and to a principal, do I make sure that every kid has an adult on campus that they can talk to? And that's a very simple task. You know, when you're talking about having X number of children, she's got 22. I'm sure she's got more than 22 staff members. But think about the idea of assigning a staff member to that child to do a nothing but a drive-through, right? When they're in school, the walk-through, pat on the back, glad you're here. But then also somebody that they can start talking to if they're feeling bullied, if they're feeling threatened, if they're not feeling comfortable in the building. Because I can tell you that children do, she's exactly right. Kids want to come to school. They want to come to school if they feel welcomed. They want to come to school if they're feeling successful, and they want to come to school if they feel like they belong. One of the several things that are on the screen that MSDE is responsible for, programs that try to address the factors that address and contribute to chronic absenteeism. And I think one of those things that we're hearing a lot about that recently is mental health. I think since COVID hit, during COVID, right after COVID, not only are children struggling with mental health, but adults are struggling with mental health. And you know, and I know when you're not feeling good, it's hard to try and make somebody else feel good. If those of you that are parents, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The days that you've got the headache and, you know, your little one's not feeling well and you're thinking, oh, if I only had like a few more minutes to myself. And so that's all part of what we need to be doing. You've got a lot of people in school. She talked about them, your school counselor, your school psychologist, their people personnel worker, the social worker. These are all people trained to really acknowledge and recognize issues related to mental health and then step in. We hear a lot recently about bullying. That was also coming out, to be honest with you, much more so, I think, after COVID. And so we need to be talking about not only those children that are doing the bullying and what is the intervention that they need, but also the intervention for victims that are being bullied. And I think what we're expecting is all schools to address that with a strong anti-bullying policy. Principal talked about reducing barriers that keeps kids from not coming to school. School health nurses are a great resource. Little ones that are what I call your frequent flyers. You know, they're the ones that are constantly in the health room. Well, there's a reason they're constantly in the health room, and it may not be because they're not feeling sick. It may be because that school nurse has made that connection that I can go and talk to the school nurse about what's bothering me. We talk about restorative practices when we're dealing with children in schools. And also we administer an annual school survey, which is put out to all schools for students as well as teachers and families to let us know how they're feeling about their school climate within their building. And then obviously we're talking about trying ways to reduce those children that are being suspended. And now my thing isn't advancing. Oh, well, let me get you've got the deck. Let me just grab my deck. Go to the last slide. Sorry. Yeah, it's not doing it. Oh, that's because that is the last slide. I think I thought I had one more slide, but I don't. So I'll stop there. Thank you. So thank you for your time. And we're here also to respond to any questions that you might have.
So we're going to take questions at the end of all the presentations, but if you want to just put a pin in it to.
Can I just ask a question about these numbers?
Sure. Yeah. Just real quick and then we'll
Yeah.
move on to
So thank you very much for coming. A couple of numbers just astounded me on slide 5. As I read it, it says 36, almost 37% of Maryland high school students are
That is
chronically absent.
That is correct.
Is that right?
That is correct. We have double checked those figures. And to be honest with you, that's not, and I'm sure, where's Sue? Who's here? Yeah, I'm sure Sue Fothergill, who's going to be talking from Attendance Works. That right now, that's pretty much close to the national average, if not a little bit higher than the national average. And it's alarming. That's exactly the reason your eyes should be drawn to that, because think about that. You have more than a third of your children that are chronically absent. So
Statewide.
In
Baltimore
And-
City, it's 54% that are
Yes.
chronically absent
Yes.
of high school kids.
Yes.
So
So
I just didn't think the numbers could be correct. That's why I wanted to ask the
Yes.
question.
No,
But
I mean,
obviously
honestly,
they are.
there was
No,
an
they are.
Economist article that highlighted that Baltimore
Yeah.
City number and this Maryland State numbers, and that was the impetus for me thinking
Yeah.
about this, actually. I mean, this is why we're kind of doing this today, because I saw that article and I was like, I can't believe that.
And the other thing
Um,
to really talk about, I don't know, look at the cohort.
But I don't want to get, let's
I'm
make,
sorry, I'm
I
sorry.
want to make sure we just keep moving and we'll do the questions.
Yeah, yeah.
There'll be a lot of questions, so thank you very much. And yeah, we'll talk more about some of what you've done, amazing work. And I wonder if those are just siloed best practices or, you know, things that are replicated across the state, but we'll talk more about that in the Q&A. Next, we'll hear from the Maryland State Education Association. So we'll hear from, we have the president here, Cheryl Boast, Jeanette Young, and Sam Zerling. Welcome. Good to see you all.
So, this one. Okay.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for having us here. I am Cheryl Boast. I am a 4th and 5th grade teacher from Baltimore County, proudly serving as the president for the Maryland State Education Association, representing over 75,000 educators across Maryland. Along with me today, I have Jeanette Young, who is a residency officer in Baltimore County, and she is also the president of our education support professionals in Baltimore County and a longtime colleague of mine. I have Sam Swerling, who is our managing director for political and legislative affairs. And we also have a phone a friend in the audience. We have Geraldine Duvall, who is our managing director for our Center for Education Policy and Practice. And I want to again thank you for having us today. It's not a committee that we're usually before, but you will find throughout our presentation, it's important because we want to talk about what we can do before students are engaged in any type of law enforcement or penalties. Since we're not here usually in front of you, I want to quickly introduce our organization. MSEA is the largest union and professional association in the state of Maryland. We represent educators in every district except for Baltimore City, even though many of our members live there, and we work closely and want to make successful schools throughout the state of Maryland. Most of you have interacted with our local affiliates who are directly represent our school employees. We have over 39 across the state, and they negotiate our contracts and work with our individual members, schools, boards of education, and local superintendents. Our members, as you can see from the slide, run the whole gamut. We are teachers, counselors, school administrators, support staff, bus drivers, custodians, aspiring educators, those in college wanting to become an educator, and our newest category of membership is higher education in the community colleges. So we are growing, but we have the whole gamut, even retirees. When you're finished with your employment, they come back and they do so much in our schools, and we represent them as well. And our mission for MSEA is to empower members to make a positive difference in their professional lives, to elevate the quality of public education for all students. So as we talk to you today, as I said, we want to put some face to the great data that the department provided you. Unfortunately, that data is not shocking to us. We're living that data each and every day, but there are faces and people behind that. And Principal Phelps explained some of those. I want to introduce you to a student named Stuart, who I had when I taught 4th grade. Stuart came to me in 4th grade after being in 13 different schools. So that's age 9. And when Stuart came in, he was reading at a kindergarten level in 4th grade. And we soon know that we have to deal with the entire child. So Stuart's family was in Section 8 housing, federal subsidized housing, and was chasing free rent, then would get evicted, then would go to the next school and the next school and the next school. So housing was very important to keep Stuart in one school to get his academic achievement. The other was mom's employment. Mom was trying to get jobs to support her family, and so she was moving to follow the jobs. So in 4th grade, when I found out that Stuart was reading at a kindergarten level and had been in 13 schools, we were able to hire mom as a cafeteria aide, give her a job. We were able to get Stuart glasses, which was one of the things that he needed, and many of our students do. And I was able to work with colleagues to move him by the end of that grade to a 4th grade reading level. But Stuart had to go to 5th grade. So I retained Stuart. I kept him for a 2nd year. We got him involved in summer camps and summer programs. And by the time he left my classroom the 2nd time, had been there for 2 full years and was reading at a 5th grade level by the time he entered 5th grade. That's what we can do when we have resources. The other thing that we did in our school for not only Stuart, but another student I had, Dominic, when they're chasing the rent and the jobs, they're usually going in a short radius in the area. I happen to teach in Essex, Maryland. And so we were able to get our federal credit union to sponsor a bus. So any student who left our school and was going to go to one of the 5 neighboring schools, they were bused back to our school to finish the year. That decreases the number of gaps that happen in learning and that time out of school. All of this fits into chronic absenteeism. And the last example I'll give you is universal breakfast. When our school signed up and we started providing breakfast for students, they wanted to come in the morning to get fed. They wanted food. And we see that even in the high schools for the grab and go. All of these items fit into the statistics of chronic absenteeism that you saw in the data that was shared. And I'm just going to leave you as we go to Jeanette, who deals with this firsthand. As a 4th and 5th grade teacher, I know that our absent students fall behind and those gaps just continue to grow. And as a teacher, I'm charged with teaching, coaching, nursing, everything else. And so you will hear throughout, we talk about, we need more staffing to do all of the things that Principal Phelps talked about, all the things that we know that we do. It is an issue of ratios of students to those staff members, whether those are social workers, psychologists, PPWs, teachers, it all impacts. So I'm going to introduce Jeanette Young, who is a residency officer in Baltimore County.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Jeanette Young, and I'm the president of the Education Support Professionals of Baltimore County. I represent the paraeducators, the office professionals, computer technicians, and interpreters, just to name a few. As my day began as a residency investigator, I often meet with families who are living in a shared dwelling. That means they're doubled up in someone else's home. As a resident investigator, it's very difficult to meet with our families because they do not have that space of their own. They're living with someone else. As not being the homeowner, the lease provider, they come to us as part of my job because it's vitally important that they have a resident that they can identify as their residency, and to get those students on a stable ground. Over the years, the volume of shared domiciles have really increased. Affording housing has increased in Baltimore County. I also see families living in multiple temporary dwellings around the county. This affects the students as they have changed schools. They have to continually verify their residency as they move from space to space. I'm assigned 35 schools, which is a large volume of students and families to support. However, I'm obligated to support any family that contacts my office. In Baltimore County, there are a total of 5 residency investigators. We have over 130 schools. Please know, this is very important work that we do in conjunction with our PPWs. PPWs are the ones, or people personnel, as you know them, are the ones who does this work in other parts of the county. In Baltimore County, most PPW work connecting students to resources outside of the school where they might need them. Guidance counselors, schools, social workers work in-house school resources along with the teacher. Staff worries about the data. As Cheryl mentioned before, I hear from administrators that they are worried about taking students into their schools who have attendance issues in other schools. They know they will take the hit on these students when it comes to the overall school absentee rate. We have to work on ways that schools are not disincentivized to take on challenging students who have a history of absenteeism or truancy. One thing I hear from my PPWs that I work with in Baltimore County is the change in the age when students can officially drop out. In 2017, Maryland changed the dropout age from 16 to 18. While we definitely want to be careful about labeling and identifying students and the stigma associated with that, there have been some unintended consequences of this change. When a student officially drops out, there are many programs we can get them engaged with, such as night school, virtual programs, GED programs, Job Corps. Some of these programs are federally funded. paid with federal dollars without the official designation of dropout. These resources are no longer available to our young people. This has created some major issues with our PPW who feel there's a gap of student age between 16 and 18 who are in limbo. We need to come together to help students who are further from graduation but need to see value in the work and that their light at the end of the tunnel. We must give them pathways to succeed. They feel like there is no shot for them to graduate. They feel they're so far behind that there's no point in trying to come to school. School staff need to work together to identify those needs, near completers, and help them over the finish line by working with the students, the guidance counselors, the teachers, the PPWs to design a plan for success. From my perspective, we need more opportunities for students to do what works for them and their families. This means more career and technical education, more virtual education option, modified school day schedules, and more night school programs. And to accomplish any of that, we need more staff to help our students along and make them feel welcome. Finally, staff need more training on how to help bring students back into the building, especially our education support staff. I'll turn it over to Cheryl. Thank you.
As many have already talked about, the research demonstrates that there's a strong relationship between students who are chronically absent and their academic and social well-being. This lower academic achievement, social isolation, and increased likelihood of dropping out of high school, along with negative health outcomes and a stronger likelihood of interacting with the criminal justice system. As you heard from Cheryl and Jeanette, we are trying to look before that happens. Like, how do we get to those root causes? And I think that everyone in this room is committed to working on that. For young learners in preschool through early elementary, we see lower scores in literacy if they've been chronically absent, and they're more likely if they've been absent in that kindergarten time, as Dr. Wright and MSDE discussed, that they'll have more chronic absenteeism in future years and overall lower academic achievement. The relationship between lower academic achievement and chronic absenteeism persists across grade levels. And so we see that decreased likelihood of enrollment in post-secondary institutions. Our members can see this in real time as they've discussed. They see what happens when a student has been out of class for a long period of time. And this has a connection to our disciplinary issues that I know many of us are concerned about. If a student has been out for a long time, they come back feeling behind and anxious. They're worried about what's going on with their friends. They're worried, what did they miss? They've maybe been seeing some of that on social media. And then they're also just behind and feel like they can't get ahead. And so let me tune out a lesson. Let me not try to pay attention because I'm already behind. This can lead to the behavioral issues that many of us see, and students feel behind, and instead of digging in, they act out. And so as we talked about, we need staff to be able to intervene with some of these students. If a student is coming in from a long absence and then showing up with some behavioral issues after being gone, we need a staff member to be able to take the time to pull them aside and to talk about what's going on, what happened when you were out of school before that leads to some bigger incident. As Jeanette talked about a little bit, with some of the data, many of our staff are talking about that there's a disincentive to report some of the data. As we've talked about, it's a reflection on our school, and that is a part of our school rating systems. And so as Jeanette also kind of referenced, we have some schools where if a student has been bouncing around, an administrator knows that they might continue to be chronically absent, and if they don't have the staff and the resources to really dig in with those students, it's going to lead to other issues for them. And I will just note that when we look at kind of some of the reasons for chronic absenteeism and some of the contributing factors, there is also a difference, as was kind of referenced, between lower grades and older grades. At a younger grade, there might be a family situation going on, as was discussed, in that specific school in Baltimore County. There's a family situation, there's transportation, there's things like that. Or there is a medical issue, and we're actually seeing that some of the rates of students being out is associated with asthma, and asthma is on the rise here in Maryland, but across the country with our students. And so there's that difference between younger students who maybe they cannot attend versus older students who maybe cannot attend because of other issues, or they're deciding not to attend or aren't engaged in kind of what's happening at the school. Now I will turn it over to Cheryl as we talk about some of our solutions.
Thanks. So you've heard a lot of the impact that chronic absenteeism has. So we're going to provide some solutions that we think are doable in our schools to help our students and help our educators deal with this. One, you will hear staffing. When we increase the number of social workers, in many of our school systems, we're above industry standards for the number of students to school counselors, the number of students to school psychologists, the numbers of students to nurses and PPWs. And so all of these folks are important to reaching students and having that one-on-one. But if a school counselor has 1,000 students on their workload, they're not seeing anybody. And they are doing recommendations, college recommendations at the high school level, all sorts of things. And it's very hard to have that immediate time with students. One of the things that Jeanette has shared with us, we need more of our education support professionals. Our education support professionals are the ones who support the social workers, the PPWs, everybody, and are often living in the communities where our students are attending school. So they have that one-on-one connection, whether that's the front office secretary, whether that's the residency officer. We need more. Right now, we are experiencing an educator shortage in all districts. And it's in varied, the school year started with approximately 2,000 vacancies in teacher positions. And right now, I heard the new number last night, is we have about 5,000 conditionally certified teachers. These are folks that are coming in, filling in for a teacher on a full year basis and have not gone through any educational training. We are working on a bill with Senator Washington to provide some additional pathways for people to get the training and get in and help fill our educator shortages. We need people to be able to build relationships and follow these students so they're not falling through the cracks, and then they don't become truant and engage in misbehavior. As you talked about, Dr. Wright talked about climate. The school report cards that every school receives through the federal mandate, there is a survey and there is a culture and climate score. And these surveys are filled out by students and educators. So we encourage people to look at those climate scores and see what we can do to help change the climate in buildings. One of the things that changes and helps is smaller class sizes. I could help Stuart because I had a smaller class size that year. When you give me 30 fourth grade students, I become a facilitator, not as much a teacher to identify all of these changes. The blueprint envisions more planning time for teachers and time to collaborate with colleagues. This is critically important. So if 4 teachers are working with my Stuart, we're all on the same page. We all know the issues. We need that collaborative time that comes through with the blueprint along with the additional staff. And parents are key to be partners in this work. And the blueprint helps to expand our community schools. And this is really a way to bring in parents, not only the expansion of pre-K where we can get to students and talk to parents earlier, but community schools provide a lot of those services and do a needs assessment to identify the needs of the school. So we're very appreciative of the expansion of community schools that was passed with the blueprint. And they do, like I said, they do have a coordinator. They try to coordinate the services that are there. Maryland's community school expansion is one of the largest in the country, and we believe it will make a huge difference for students and families to have more resources. Research has found that community schools are effective at reducing chronic absenteeism. Researchers that examined the implementation of a New York City community schools program found that student attendance was positively impacted among elementary, middle, and high school students, and graduations, and a reduction in disciplinary incidents, especially for elementary and middle school students. Baltimore City has experience with community schools for a little while longer than other parts of the state. And a 2016 study in Baltimore City found that community schools have decreased chronic absenteeism from 27.4 to 19.3 for elementary school students and 23.8 to 17 for middle school students. Some of them have school-based health providers, built-in daycare centers, wraparound services, evening activities, summer activities, connections to mental health support. Also, the expansion of career technology education. Jeanette talked about, she meets students who they're not interested in school. And we have to find out what will interest them. And when you go into our career technology schools, those kids are highly interested in what they're doing, but these are not provided in every school community. And so Blueprint does call for that expansion, but we do need to look at getting students early and what interests them so we can get them excited, learning, and out into the workforce. The other one is our universal school meals, which I shared with you. This is critically important. Students are not learning and they're not coming in when they're hungry. And the more that we can do to feed our students, that is very helpful. I'm trying to get through because I know you have a lot to talk about today. Overall, we need more hands on deck. We need more programs and resources like community schools, expansion of pre-K, and transportation, housing, and health services, not only that impact the student, but impact the family. Oftentimes when mom or dad are sick, students stay home because they don't have the way to get them there. So it's a whole family approach. So I want to thank you for your interest in this topic and allowing us the time to talk with you today, and we'll be available for questions when you're ready as well. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. This has been great. I appreciate it. So next we'll hear from the Maryland Judiciary. We have two distinguished associate judges from Montgomery County Circuit Court. We have Judge Dumais, and is Judge Smith going to come up and join us? Yeah. Two outstanding Marylanders. Good to see you both. Thank you all for making the time.
Nice to see you. So I am going to start by talking about a bill that it's a local bill at the moment, so it would apply, as everyone here knows, just to Montgomery County. But before I go down that path, I also wanted to give you a little bit about sort of what I'm doing now. Yes, I am an associate judge on the Circuit Court for Montgomery County, but in Montgomery County, we go through rotations. So I think many of on this panel know that my background was in family law. I practiced family law for 32 years. Did divorce, custody, domestic violence. And I did that for the first 18 months as a member of the bench. Since July, I have been on the juvenile delinquency rotation. So what my day looks like at this stage is in the mornings, I handle adjudications, perhaps detention reviews or probation reviews. And then in the afternoon, I'll do some of the same, although between 1:30 and 2:30, I handle what are called emergencies. So my calendar is blocked. And a juvenile delinquency emergency could either be the department or the state's attorney asking for a writ or an arrest warrant, so to speak, for a juvenile. A lot of times it might be the writ return. Maybe I issued a writ because a child didn't appear at a hearing. And so I issued a writ, they are picked up, and then the next 1:30, if they turn themselves in that morning, I see them that morning, so they never have to spend a night. But I do the emergencies between 1:30 and 2:30, and then I'll handle additional dispositions or adjudications as the day goes on. In any given day, I can handle anywhere, and Judge Smith, who has been doing it juvenile much longer than I have, can explain it even more, but I can have anywhere between 8 to 12 or 15 cases. And so the days are long, but and At the same time, they are very satisfying. What I particularly like about it is it's an ability that I actually get to interact with the youth. So that, you know, many times if they are detained, then I see them at least every 14 days. And so with that, you get to a point where, you know, I have one young man who I really enjoy, and walks into the courtroom, Miss Dumais, how you doing? You know, and it's just all excited. And, you know, and his story is heartbreaking. When I first saw this young man, he was high as a kite, and he had been AWOL, as we call it. In other words, he'd left home and he was gone for months. A writ had been issued long before I got on the bench. They pick him up. He's high as a kite, comes to me in an emergency. His mother's in the courtroom. And the question is, does he go home or is he detained? He hadn't been in school at all during this 3 or 4 month period of time. And his mother said, I can't help him. I can't help him. You need to keep him. He was a danger to himself or others because of how high he was. And so I did detain him. Well, the rest of the story is that was probably a month before Thanksgiving. Around Thanksgiving, he's at Cheltenham. I was going to go to the dinner that they have at Cheltenham for families right before Thanksgiving, but was on the bench too long. And if you remember that Tuesday before Thanksgiving, it was pouring. Cheltenham from Montgomery County is quite a hike. And it was the worst traffic in the world because it was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. So I didn't go. But I saw Justin the next morning, and the deputy secretary had been at the dinner, had sat with Justin and sort of sent me an email and said, I was with one of your kids last night. And I had a nice long chat with him, and I told him he needs to make better decisions. Sure enough, Justin appeared by Zoom that day, gets on. Hi, Miss Dumais. I was with your friend last night. The secretary? Okay. But I said, well, good. And he said, he gave me a lot of good advice. Justin's now home, living with his mother. He is in an outpatient drug treatment program. He was addicted to fentanyl. And he would tell me when I eventually spoke to him, and I said, you know, when I first met you, you were not in good shape. He said, I was crashing. But that's what I get to do every day. It's a joy and a privilege, particularly when you have the stories like Justin, who has turned around. Now, granted, he is currently on community detention, home electronic monitoring, which means he can't leave the house unless he's got permission. His mother, because of some of his prior behavior, was kicked out of her apartment complex. So it's a 1-bedroom apartment. He sleeps on the couch. She sleeps in the bedroom. But he's turned around. He's back in school. You know, and I can go on and on about stories, and I know that Judge Smith can as well. But I wanted to tell you about one of the success stories. But at the beginning, when I started down the juvenile path, one of the things that really stunned me, and again, it's, you know, just based, I don't know why, but stunned me. Kids don't go to school. And it's particularly middle and high school. But the number of young people I see each day that just stopped going to school. Sometimes they actually go to school and then they just hang around the hallways. They don't go to class. They don't do assignments. And so that's the reason I became interested in what else can we do, and preferably before they get to me as a juvenile delinquency judge. So that's the reason why I asked Senator Nancy King to introduce it's called the Truancy Reduction and School Reengagement Program for Montgomery County. This is not a real novel idea. There are multiple counties in Maryland that already have it, but here's what Montgomery County numbers look like. We have in the Montgomery County Public School System over 168,000 students. And as recently reported by WTOP and the Washington Post, the percentage of students who are chronically absent in Montgomery County, in other words, they're missing more than 10% of class at any given time, is 21.4%, or 34,161 students. 34,161 students are chronically absent in Montgomery County, 21% of the 168,000.
We have 27 high schools in Montgomery County. We have 40 middle schools. Our high schools, we have 52,000 kids. In middle school, we have 37,000. We have 137 elementary schools with 68,000. And then we have another approximately 10,000 in some of our special schools or alternative programs. The legislation that's being proposed certainly is not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve all of the problems, but as I think you heard from the department or the first presentation, as well as from the teachers, we need more tools. And Joe Valerio used to use this term all the time, tools in the toolbox. We need more tools in the toolbox. And that's what this truancy reduction program would be. It would fall under the education. So it would be considered sort of I hate using the word court because that turns people off, or so I've been told. If they think they're going to court because you're truant, somehow there's a punishment. This program is entirely voluntary. There are no teeth. I can't, if it's in the truancy court program, there is no detention. There is no punishment. It's how do we get families re-engaged? We have one program already in Montgomery County that is actually done very well by our state's attorney's office. And John McCarthy, who I know was here on Tuesday, and because I'm a geek, I actually listened to the whole hearing. But I heard, and he didn't talk about this because that wasn't on the agenda that day, but he has an excellent program where he engages retired principals. In fact, Judge Smith's principal, Fred Evans, is part of the program. Retired principals and teachers, and any other volunteers, Phil Andrews, who used to be on our county council, and they go into the schools and work directly with children that are referred by the schools. That's similar to what the truancy court reduction program will be. It would be referrals from the school. DJS is not involved. This is just a referral directly to, for instance, in Prince George's County, it goes directly to a magistrate's office. She may have been before you on other things. Althea Stewart-Jones is amazing. She runs that program there. The petition in Prince George's County never gets into what we now call MDEC, the electronic filing. It's a separate petition kept in a separate office. And then she'll go through and they'll meet with the families. The families will go through different programs. They'll direct them to counseling. And at the end, there'll be a graduation. But there is no penalty to it. I'm not going to find anybody delinquent. Bill is really just enabling legislation. What happens if it passes? Then Montgomery County will convene a work group to sort of decide what we want our program to look like, and we'll put it together. I will send you a copy of the letter that I did send to the subcommittee for Montgomery County that sort of lays out, what will happen. The case would come to the juvenile court through a petition from the school system. State's attorney does not bring the case, not involved at all, and neither does the Department of Juvenile Services. The child who is the subject of the case is not adjudicated delinquent and is not determined to be a child in need of assistance or a SINA. The child cannot be detained, can't be placed in shelter, can't be placed on community detention or sent to an out-of-home placement. The petition is filed with the truancy program by the school system. The program staff will reach out and invite the family to talk about the program. It currently is in Dorchester, Somerset, and Wacomico County, Hartford, Kent, and Prince George's. And Montgomery County is asking that we be given the opportunity to do it. And I am more than happy to be involved in it based on how important I think it is to the kids that I see every single day. And the number, and some of what I think several people that testified today talked about, some of these kids are just disengaged for any number of reasons. I have another young man who is clearly suffering from great depression. And we're getting him services, but it's slow. I know the Secretary Giraldi talked about that. That's the hardest part of the job. We all know what needs to be done, but getting the services in place is really difficult. I have kids that we have detained because they have committed very serious crimes, and they are what we call pending placement. So let's say a child is charged as an adult, gets waived down. That process alone probably takes 4 months. So now they're in juvenile court and they're detained. Again, it was probably if they were charged in adult court, this is usually a very serious violent crime. Everyone agrees that the child needs, or the youth needs services. So we go through the juvenile process, we adjudicate, I indicate that they are found involved in an armed carjacking or a gun crime. Then it's 30 days before we have a final disposition. Final disposition is when we decide what services are needed. We decide this child needs a residential treatment program, needs to be in a residential behavior modification program. They remain detained usually, unless I can come up with something creative, but they're probably detained, waiting placement another 3 or 4 months. So they can be detained for up to 8 months before they get into the residential treatment plan, which may well be another 3 to 6 months. The programs that we're sending them to are excellent. It's that block before we get them there that is the problem. And these are usually kids not engaged in school. The good news, if there is any in this scenario, one of the things that Secretary Schiraldi implemented, and I think it makes a big difference, is in at least 3 of the detention centers, there is now what's called a pending placement unit. And it's the pending placement unit, at least they're getting some services. Because if you're just being detained, you're getting education, but you're not getting much else. You'll get medical treatment if you need it, but there's not actually therapy. But if you're pending placement, they will start the therapy. But the other piece that I just wanted to emphasize, and then I'm going to let Judge Smith speak, is and Secretary Schiraldi said it, we don't have enough drug treatments for these kids. And I see I told you about my friend Justin, but he's not alone. The number of kids I see every day with a fentanyl addiction is just heartbreaking. And the placement and when they're home is a program where it's group, but it's virtual. They have to go in and do urinalysis, but it's virtual 3 or 4 days a week. That's the substance abuse treatment that's in the community. There's no substance abuse in where they're inpatient in Maryland for these kids, which is desperately, desperately needed. And I know there's some plans on the horizon. I've spoken to Secretary Schiraldi, but they're on the horizon and we desperately need. So, I mean, although obviously the legislation that will come from this committee is very important, at the same time, talk to your friends on appropriations. Secretary Schiraldi really does need funding. Particularly, we have to get some inpatient drug treatment up and running for these young people. Happy to answer questions when it's the appropriate time. And with that, I'll turn it to Judge Smith.
No, thanks, Judge. Before Judge Smith gets up, I just want to put a pin in this because I'm going to watch this last segment. You know, you've walked us through the vignette with Justin, and then this last segment here really highlights, I think, the cycle of a case and the cycle of the system, and highlights some of the points of failure. And, you know, once some things just are not congruent with each other just yet, we haven't synced up yet. And as we're going to have a lot of discussions on JJRA reforms, and some people, we're not going to repeal obviously what we did. Well, I know some of us would like to, but we're not going to do it. But the tweaks, I think what you've highlighted kind of demonstrates where things are not syncing properly, and where we can tweak and make sure that happens. I mean, so I'm gonna
one other small
story. I mean,
this
this was very, very enlightening. So I just wanted, yeah.
So I had another young man. I'm going to call him Jim for the sake of whatever. And he is quite the character, and he can work the system, and he did work the system. So he's only charged with 2 misdemeanor thefts. Technically, the only thing I could do is basically, and he's got mental health issues. All of this was very clear, but I can put him on probation for 6 months. Now, granted, if he doesn't do what he's supposed to do, I can extend it, you know, for the 3-month increments or whatever the case may be. But this kid desperately needed, I mean, he was stealing to support his habit, but he managed to keep it at the misdemeanor level. So all I could do was the 6 months. Well, there's this one little piece of the code that I found in the probation area that said I was not, or the court, not so much me, the court's not precluded from committing the child to another department. Now, I hadn't done this, but I decided I'd try it. So I committed Jim to the Department of Health. His mother did everything in her power for this child. His mother was completely involved all along. She had submitted him for an emergency evaluation, done emergency evaluation petitions for him 8 times, which is where you say he's a danger to himself or others. And please, you know, sheriff, please, or police, please pick him up and take him to the emergency department and have him evaluated. He's out in a couple of hours. 8 times. So she says, I don't know what to do. So was at Spring Grove Adolescent Hospital in the behavioral health wing. I just got the report this week. He is now sober. We'll cross our fingers that we can continue that when he's out. But this is the first time that he's gotten the actual very severe diagnoses with reference to mental health and oppositional defiant disorder and ADHD, with very specific recommendations of what we can get for him. Because one of the other downsides to, and again, I have a great deal of respect for Secretary Schiraldi. There are things he does I like and things I don't like, but he's got a vision. But one of the other issues is sometimes I'll have these kids, they'll say, he needs to be in a behavioral health, but he has an IEP. Some of these residential treatment centers, we can't accommodate the IEP. So now we've got the kids sitting longer in detention. Kids that need the services, and there's just this, we're not getting it to them. So I appreciate the opportunity and I appreciate what you're doing to try and help us make those connections.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before I forget, I just want to jump on one thing that Judge Dumais said, and that is with respect to Jim. Once Jim goes through the process of drug treatment, inpatient drug treatment, after he's probably waited 7 months, actually you put him in MDH, so maybe not 7 months. I've had a couple kids addicted to fentanyl who literally sat in Cheltenham for 7 months waiting to go to a drug treatment facility, inpatient drug treatment facility, because we don't have one here in Maryland. DJS says, oh, well, we can send them to our facility and he'll get drug treatment there. But the issue isn't their behavior. Yes, they're in court because they committed an offense, but they're committing offenses to get their hands on drugs. So all I wanted to say about what Judge Dumais just said is when Jim gets out of the facility, what are the aftercare plans? So I wear a couple different hats in the circuit court from Montgomery County. One, I head up the juvenile unit or juvenile court. 2, I'm also one of the drug court judges. So what I do know is that remaining sober requires daily nurturing. So what is going to happen to Jim when he's back in the community, maybe back at school with the same peers, back with the same stressors that got him to the place where he's using fentanyl? What services do we have to make sure that he remains sober? And the answer really is pretty much nothing. So with that, I was looking at some quick statistics on truancy, education, and crime. 85% of all juveniles who interface with the juvenile court system are functionally low literate. Juvenile incarceration reduces the probability of high school completion and increases the probability of incarceration later in life. High school dropouts are 3.5 times more likely than high school graduates to be arrested in their lifetime. High school dropouts are 63% more likely to be incarcerated than their peers with 4-year college degrees. So we know that there is a direct correlation between getting that high school diploma and not ending up in our court system for criminal behavior. The goal of juvenile court is to rehabilitate these kids and to keep them from living life doing the installment plan. And what I mean by the installment plan is coming back into court, getting a 2-year sentence, going out the door with the sheriff's deputies, coming back into court, getting a 5-year sentence, going back out with the sheriff's deputies. That's what we're trying to save these kids from. And we don't have the tools to do it. I mean, we just don't have the tools to do it. If I had to describe our system in one word, I would say it's a mess. And that's, and it's unfortunate. So we're talking about truancy and education. But really what we need when we're dealing with our kids and all the stressors that they face and all the things that are going on, we need a holistic approach, right? Because it's not just about they're not going to school. Well, why aren't they going to school? Is it that their parents maybe they have a parent who has to leave the house at 5 a.m. and they're leaving it to the children. The 8-year-old's responsible for getting the 5-year-old to school. Are they disengaged because they have some kind of learning disability that hasn't been diagnosed? The number of children who come into juvenile court and are in 9th grade for the 3rd time is astounding. 9th grade for the 3rd time. We know in all likelihood, they're not going to graduate from high school. We order them to, go to school, be respectful, or if we really think they're not going to do the high school thing, get your GED, because we understand the importance of getting that piece of paper with respect to not just, finding jobs in life, but staying out of prison. And that is what our goal is. So we have a school system. My understanding is, the teachers aren't going to tell parents, we think your kid has ADHD. Mother of 3 boys with ADHD. No teacher ever said to me, get your kid tested, because once the school system starts to tell you that, then they're on the hook to pay for it, right? When they say it. So if parents don't have the means to do it, what happens? The kids stay in the classroom with their learning disability or the ADHD. They start to feel like they can't do it. They don't know why they can't sit still. They don't know why they can't do the work the way Stephen's doing the work, right? So they become disengaged. When you start to ask these kids in the courtroom, why aren't you going to class? Why aren't you going to school? You can get to the point where they say, I really don't understand what's happening in math. Or I don't, I'm confused about whatever it is that's taking place. So we know that with all that comes promiscuity, self-esteem issues, drugs, committing offenses, 9th grade for the 3rd time. We also are dealing with in juvenile court the lack of mental health treatment, right? So a lot of these kids who also aren't going to school are depressed, as Judge DeMay said. They have anxiety. I've had kids who have said that they don't want to return to school because it makes them anxious. Are they anxious because they don't know what's going on in their classes? They don't want to be made to feel dumb in front of other students? Who knows? But the point is, we know these kids are having mental health problems and they're not being addressed. Substance abuse problems. We already said we don't have any place to send these children. When they develop substance abuse programs, I don't want to send them to Green Ridge because that's really not going to address their issue, their substance abuse issue. So what I would beg and plead for, aside from the fact that we would love to have the truancy program, any program that we can get to try and prevent these kids from returning to the court, we're willing to do. We're willing. We want it. We started a program in Montgomery County, a social work intern program that really came to be because I was lamenting how much handholding I have to do in juvenile court. When I first got into the juvenile court in Montgomery County, and I was trying to work with the school system to try and get kids back into class, because that's another issue. The school system's overwhelmed. When they have a kid who is robbing kids in the middle of the hallway, they don't want them to come back into school. They've already got too many other issues that they're dealing with. So getting our kids back into school is another problem for us. So I was lamenting, I have all these kids and I can't get their psychological evaluation. I can't get their psychiatric evaluation. I can't get them into therapy. And my mother-in-law, who is a social worker and high up social services in New York City, said, why don't you start a social work intern program? Get graduate social work students to come in and work with these families. And we've had amazing success. We've been doing it for a little over a year. But what the social work students consistently talk about doing is it's not just working with Ricky, it's working with the entire family, right? The family has food insecurity. They're facing eviction. They you know, the kid's not going to school because he actually needs an IEP, but the school's telling the mom, well, he doesn't, we don't really think he needs an IEP, or the mom's getting the runaround, getting the IEP meeting going. So all that to say that we need all the help that we can get. We don't have the services. It takes forever to get our kids into services. We don't have the programs. We don't have the drug treatment, mental health. We're, you know, we're swimming upstream without a paddle, basically. So happy to answer any questions. I have 1,010,000 vignettes. I could go on and on about juvenile court and the needs that we have for our children, but I won't unless you ask me a question.
No, this is really enlightening, and I know that you all, Judge Smith, this is your bailiwick, and you've had a long history here. So definitely was excited when I learned you were coming, and that's why we reached out. And obviously, Judge DeMay, same thing here. Not only in your work in the General Assembly, but as an attorney outside, and then also on the bench. So very enlightening. Thank you very much for this. I know we're gonna have some questions, but we're gonna move on to attendance works, and then we'll loop back for some Q&A at the end. But thank you very much for your time. This has been great.
There's two separate presentations, mine and his.
Okay, so the only one I have is the,
Nobody asked me.
yeah.
You don't have the attendance works one.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Let me, do you need to, okay, let me go check.
It's okay.
Um,
Yeah.
do you have any change with you?
Mm-mm,
Okay, let me go see if I can find it real quick. I'll be right
no problem. We're getting my slides. Just a second. That's true. They need to. I mean, there's a lot I can say without them, but there are a couple of visuals I think are important. Mm-hmm. I can resend them if it's needed. I mean, some of the stuff some of the visuals I think are important to see.
It's a dad joke time. Mhm.
No problem.
So my wife asked me to pick up a 6-pack of Sprite last night, but I picked 7-Up.
Yeah. That's a version of it anyway.
It just didn't say last.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
okay. I sent a couple of iterations because I kept finding typos.
Okay, it said last one. That's not hoping this is the right one.
It's close enough.
Okay,
And I like literally for sending.
I have yours.
And
Oh, you're fine. No.
went to get my annual physical right before session started. My doctor said I had the peekaboo virus. He sent me right to the ICU. ICU peekaboo? All right, never mind. All right. That's it. All right, here we go. Attendance Works is up and ready to go. Thank you all very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Senator Smith, members of the committee. We appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk about the issue of chronic absenteeism and truancy. As you heard from many of the people that spoke previously to us, is the fact that attendance is a leading indicator for student success or vice versa. Absenteeism is a leading indicator that students are off track academically. And just to put a fine point in some of the points you already heard today, it starts as early as pre-kindergarten and kindergarten. Children who are chronically absent at the very beginning of their school career are significantly less likely to be able to read at grade level by third grade. If they get to third grade not being able to read at grade level, it's at that point where teachers shift their practice into teaching content rather than teaching to read. It becomes much harder to catch a child up and being able to learn how to read as they matriculate through their years because they've missed those formative years. We have young people who have been chronically absent year after year, pre-K, K, first, second grade. So we're not talking about just 1 year of experience. We're talking about years and years and years, patterns of absenteeism that happen over time. The other thing I would say about this pattern is you heard a couple of folks talk about the disconnect for families between the importance of attendance and academic success. There are a couple of reasons that filter into that. One of them is just early grades. Some of our families think, well, it's just kindergarten or it's just first grade. Children can miss a few days here and there. It's not that big of a deal. They'll catch up later. The reality, though, is those are the most important formative years, not just for learning to read, but learning social and emotional skills and establishing habits that help those young people throughout their careers. So part of our work is helping families understand that relationship. We also, because of the way we've approached attendance over decades, focusing mostly on truancy and just now shifting our practices to chronic absence, we've taught our families that attendance is a habit of, that attendance is a matter of compliance rather than a habit of academic success. And so when we're trying to encourage good behavior or trying to encourage behavior that we want to see, if people believe that we're compelling that behavior because it's a law and not because it's in the best interest of their children or their children's academic success, it also feeds into that disconnect about the relationship between the two. So we really have some very important education work to do. I thought the principal that spoke earlier today, the practices that she spoke of are incredible practices. And those are the kinds of things that we need school leaders to do. Not every school leader in the state of Maryland has achieved that level of practice yet. So there's a lot of room for an opportunity for growth in terms of helping folks adopt the kinds of practices that this amazing principal shared earlier. So how do I make it go? See, it's not just you, Carrie. I couldn't make it go either. It's the mouse. All right, but the mouse isn't going. It's not a problem. See,
I don't know. It's like.
the other thing I would say about children who are chronically absent persistently in the early grades, they're more likely to be identified for special education services by third grade, which then increases the cost and expense in terms of catch up that we have to put in place. Here we go. Let's make it work.
I'm trying.
No,
I don't know why it keeps like freezing up.
can we do it outside of presentation mode? Because I can just move through the slides while it's not in presentation mode.
No, because of the virtual, the website.
Okay. The next slide. You
Yeah,
did.
see, it just stops. It doesn't. There you go.
Okay. I know you heard the definitions earlier, so I won't dive into them too deeply in this moment, except to hit on a few fine points. One of them, Superintendent Wright talked about average daily attendance. It's the average number of kids that show up any given day. And so it doesn't tell you which students are missing consistently. It just tells you the average number of kids that are there. So on any given day, you could have 95% of your children show up. But the 5% of the children that are missing, the question is, are they missing frequently? Was that the only day they missed? Or are they missing, a day a week, on Fridays perhaps, speaking to the pattern that was elevated just a moment ago. The other thing that we have in our state of Maryland is one of the most lagging indicators of truancy in the country. Truancy in California is 3 days. Truancy in DC is 10 days. Truancy in Maryland is 20 days. And you have to be on roll for 90 days. So if a child is truant in a school and they've only been on roll for say 15 or 20 days, and then say they move to another school, and then they're truant in that school, if they're not on roll for 90 days, that doesn't count as truancy. So our data system, at least the one that we've relied on for many years, only flagged a very finite number of children that are actually missing enough school to be at risk. So when you look at this data here, this bar chart, what you're looking at is 2021-22 school year data, truancy by district and chronic absence by district. And what I want you to notice is that when we only look at truancy, we're missing the full scale and scope of the problem in terms of who's at risk because of their patterns of attendance. So when we talk about solving this problem, we actually have to recognize that 1/3 of our children in our state are missing enough school to be at academic risk. That's 272,000 children statewide. We have a significant problem that we need to solve. Oh, the numbers didn't come. But the other thing I want to share with you, you're looking at data that shows you the concentrations of chronic absence by school. So pre-pandemic, the concentration of chronic absence was mostly, if you look at the blue bar, most of our schools had less than 20% of their kids were chronically absent. Since the pandemic, 75% of our schools have concentrations of chronic absence at 20% and above. 1 out of 5 kids are chronically absent in 75% of our schools, at least in that the 21-22 school year. It's a little bit better this year, but we're still talking about the vast majority of our schools experiencing very high levels of absenteeism. The other thing that we know is that chronic absence is both an indicator of inequity and is a contributing factor to inequity. So in our communities, lack of access to stable housing, transportation, economic stability, and otherwise contribute to why some children are missing more school. And then once those children miss school, they fall further behind, contributing to the inequities and outcomes that we see in our schools. So our children are double whammied in terms of their experiences in our communities and in our schools. So I have a colleague, Clea McNeely, who has started to look into the impact of truancy policies and ask questions about the effect of those policies. She's currently a principal investigator in research we're doing here in the state of Maryland. We'll have research in about a year. In the meantime, I'm going to share some data that she found from other states. So first of all, there's bias in terms of what gets defined as an excused or unexcused absence, bias in how those definitions are applied, bias in the policies and the consequences of what children experience if they're defined as illegal or legally absent, and then bias in how those consequences are carried out. The consequences of how we define excused and unexcused results in school practices that can then contribute to students becoming further disengaged. If a young person misses school for an unexcused reason, say they stayed home to take care of their sick sibling because their parent had to go to work, that's not a legal absence in the state of Maryland. When they return to school the next day, they don't get to turn in their work. They don't get to make up missed exams because it's illegal. They miss school for illegal reasons. Now, children that miss school for legal reasons, they get to make up the work. Sometimes they even get tutoring support. So we treat children really differently when they're children and they're missing school. Oftentimes, absences are absences that happen due to poverty. They're absences that happen due to the over-policing of people, of Black and brown people. And they're absences that happen due to the unpredictable lives of people that are living at the economic margins of our society. The definitions that fall within legal usually benefit families that have income and benefit families whose children are participating in high status activities. So you may be wondering, what does that mean for us in Maryland? Because I do. And I look at this list of excused absences. These are the reasons children are legally allowed to miss school in our state. If you miss school for a reason that doesn't fall on this list, that becomes an illegal absence. And if those illegal absences add up, then you become a truant. So some of the reasons I've heard children talk about why they're missing school, or families talk about why their children are missing school: lack of clean clothing, that's not on this list. Lack of backup transportation if they miss the bus, not on this list. Having to go find a house because I just got evicted, so now I got to take my children with me, not on this list. So there are a lot of reasons that children miss school that don't qualify as legal, that one might argue isn't somebody just skipping. The other challenge by the way we've bifurcated our system is that when you want to look for patterns about why kids are missing, we code all these reasons. So if a children is missing school due to illness, we have a code. If a children missed school this past year because our transportation systems completely failed, in Howard County, Anne Arundel County, and Baltimore County, yellow buses just didn't show up for days at a time. Children left at home every day. That would be tracked, lack of authorized transportation. But when schools want to dig into why kids are missing for illegal reasons, it takes a lot more work to investigate, identify what's happening, and start to document the patterns so that they can start to address patterns of behavior, as this fabulous principal has. So in terms of how we move forward, we need to shift from truancy to chronic absence. We need to recognize that as a state, when we take a holistic problem-solving approach, I know the other day people talked a lot about public health models. Public health models apply here as well, and ensure that we're looking at all absences, because if a student is chronically absent, frankly, due to asthma, somebody mentioned asthma, and they're missing 20 or 30 days of school, they're at academic risk. And there are healthcare solutions to severe asthma that we can put in place, but we have to notice that those absences are happening as well. So preventative, problem solving, family and student engagement is the approach. And when we talk about system strategy, these are the ingredients to a systemic approach to reduce chronic absenteeism. Districts have put in place strategic partnerships like community school strategy, bringing in partners that can engage families and engage students and help to address the barriers. When we utilize positive engagement and not just letters home to families to tell them how many days their children missed, and if they don't come to school, they're going to court. Instead, we educate, engage, help families understand and see the relationship between their children's attendance or older youth in their attendance and their success, making sure folks have actionable data. Not every district produces data in a way that allows principals to see the patterns of absenteeism, to be able to look at the data by geography, by weekday, by student population, to start to see where do I have the greatest challenges. Capacity building so we can have more awesome principals, and shared accountability, not just for our school systems, but for the partners that work with our school systems. Chronic absenteeism should be a must respond to indicator for DSS, DJS, and others. Currently, if a child's on probation, at least I think this is still true, and they start to miss school, that violates the probation and potentially gets them back deeper into court involvement. What we haven't said is if a child's on probation and they start to miss school, what if we use that to, instead of violate the probation, indicate to us that we need to have a deeper dive into how to support this young person to get them back into school? So leveraging attendance data to initiate deeper problem solving rather than deeper punitive action. And then finally, I think I'm at adequate and equitable resources. Maryland has made an incredible commitment to adequate and equitable resources through the passage of the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. However, it's not fully secured, so it needs to be fully funded. And we also need to continue to explore what adequacy means post-pandemic with the level of absenteeism we're seeing across the state and the level of academic distress we're seeing. So we have made a good faith effort, and I think we need to dig deeper. And finally, and this is a big slide with lots of data on it, but I just want to share that positive conditions for learning encourage children to come to school every day. When our schools are physically and emotionally healthy and safe, when we have in place programming that includes advisories, mentorship, after-school programming, clubs, and otherwise, things that children, the value proposition that brings children into school every day, belonging, connection, and support. So can we have that adult to student ratio that is needed to really dig down and ensure every child is connected to a caring adult? And then, of course, all the work we're doing around restorative practices and many of the other initiatives that are underway in the state of Maryland are all promising, but we have to strengthen those approaches, fund those approaches, and make sure our schools have the resources they need to succeed. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague to talk. And I just want to make sure you know who you have here. So Larry Simmons is one of the principal investigators and director of community engagement for the Nobody Asked Me campaign and research project. He's also a Robert Wood Johnson Fellow. He has devoted his professional life to serving communities across Baltimore and in Maryland. With 20 years of experience in youth programming, serving as a community school coordinator, sitting on multiple nonprofit boards, and the past president of the Parent Community Advisory Board for Baltimore City Public Schools. Larry's here to talk to you more about his research from the Nobody Asked Me campaign.
It's nice to hear about myself a little bit. And good afternoon, Chair and Vice Chair and Committee. My part of this presentation, I think, is really to kind of, is to really put voice to what we all heard today and really to put student voice to what we all heard today. I think we talked a lot about what we kind of see as the solutions or what we kind of see as a problem, but we have dedicated our work to amplifying the voices of young people and their families. And so the Nobody Asked Me research team is a project that came about between me and one of my good friends and colleagues, Dr. Richard Lofton at Johns Hopkins School of Education. I was a Bunting Fellow in 2018, and he and I got together around a conversation that I think many young people have, many marginalized people have. It's just idea of nobody asked me, like, how do these things just keep happening in my neighborhood, keep happening in my school, keep happening to me, and I was not at the table, right? All these decisions that are constantly made about our communities and about young people. This is an opportunity that we kind of wanted to highlight, and we wanted to make sure that we were amplifying the voices of young people. And so because our project really kind of focused on young people in Baltimore City, we just kind of thought about the themes that exist in Baltimore City. If you're familiar with Billie Holiday and the story of and the song Strange Fruit, we kind of looked at what was happening to young people, what was happening to communities in Baltimore as a historical type of strange fruit. And for this particular conversation, I have taken a presentation that I usually do with my colleague that's about 100 slides. We brought it down to 28 slides and really have taken out all the data that I think many of my colleagues have kind of shared with you guys today, and to really get to the nitty gritty of what young people are saying. And so in 2018, Baltimore's Promise did a research study around employment for young people, just to kind of see what was happening after they graduated and what happened when they came back, whether they went to a 2-4 or trade school. What was that employment rate like? And we saw that our young people were not making it. They were doing everything we asked them to do, what the state actually requires, and they still were coming back home and not making it. And because Baltimore kind of disproportionately represents very high numbers in the truancy and the chronic absence space, we thought this would be a good idea to kind of present here. And so in our research, we noticed a double isolation that young people were facing. around housing, the criminal justice system, education, and pathways to economic success. And we heard that today from almost everybody who presented. And so the strange fruit of education has manifested into structural violence and disinvestment, which has led to a mundane terror. And this idea of mundane terror is what we believe young people and many of us who live in cities face, right? It's this thing that kind of goes on around you and to you that you've become a little numb to. So you're thinking about a young person who lives in Sandtown, who wakes up and somebody is saying, get your ass up, right? And so from the time you got cussed out to get up, and then you traveling through your neighborhood, you get on an MTA bus that you are sharing with adults that are trying to make it to work. And then things are kind of sometimes happening that are not for a 14, 15, 17-year-old to kind of experience, get off that bus, make it to school, and somebody saying, sit down and get started, right? No one has taken any time to say, are you okay? No one has taken any time to say, when you made it back to school after missing some days, that we missed you and we were looking for you. So it's this idea of mundane violence. And so you'll kind of see that coming up as I talk more. So I talked about this investment, and I think I don't have to read this slide. I think that everybody is very familiar with this investment and what that means, particularly when it comes to marginalized communities and when it comes to Black and Brown students. I think that's been the theme of our conversation, as one of the themes that's come up in our conversation today as well. And so the selection criteria, we want to make it very clear that our project, young people self-selected to be a part of this. We did not go to the Baltimore City Public Schools and say, hey, we have this project, send the kids this way. Richard and I actually hung out at grocery stores, we hung out at youth events, we hung out at Shake and Bake, we hung out at places that young people existed, and had conversations and invited them and their parents to do a full participation to the study. And so this is just a map of where, kind of highlights where most of our folks have come from. If you kind of notice, you are probably familiar with Dr. Brown's, his research and his work around the Black butterfly and the white owl. Our study just kind of supports that as well. I talked about the mundane violence and the mundane terror through interactions with law enforcement, their commute to school, in their neighborhoods and classrooms, and this deficit framing that seems to often happen to young people, not just Black and Brown students, but just young people as well. And so here we are. I'm not going to read each one of these slides, but I just want to be able to share that young people not only have stories of what it feels like or what the things that they have gone through, but they've also offered recommendations to us as well. So we have recommendations, but we highlight the young people's recommendations too. So I think you all have had a copy of this. Everybody has a copy of the report, so I don't really, okay. So I don't have to go through, share them. And so as you see, it's this constant, this young person here is talking about what it was like for when their school was shut down because of the heating or the lack of heating. And then here we go. Students encounter mundane terror, interactions with police, with what my colleague Sue just kind of mentioned, the commute to and from their schools, unsafe and healthy school infrastructures, deficit framing of Black youth, and psychological distress of no escape, feeling like I have nowhere to go, right? No one is listening to me. Oops, sorry. And so the general findings is there's a misalignment between youth aspirations and city and school services for career readiness and opportunity. Black youth are socialized through various educational, private, and state-sponsored structures toward low-wage jobs. And so when we talk about CTE programs, right, young people know what they want, right? And so oftentimes the CTE programs are not the programs or the career paths that they are choosing or that they're looking for. Some of the CTE programs don't offer an accreditation or offer, I'm losing the word right now, but they don't offer an accreditation. I can't get it out right now, but young people that we talk to are asking for those CTE programs that are in the media, those CTE programs that speak to the work that a lot of them started doing through COVID, right? Like really getting into social media, really getting to just being self-employed. There's no entrepreneurial path through CTE. And so one of my colleagues who asked, what else do you want to achieve in your life? and a young person. I'll just also share that we did change names and things like that just to protect our participants, that this one person wants to move somewhere safer and provide for his family just to be really successful. He believes that leaving Baltimore, that leaving this city, leaving this state, he's going to be more successful, right? And so what do we do when we're trying to maintain a population, right? What do we do to keep this place as a place that folks want to live in, that young people want to grow and build families in? And again, another opportunity to talk about the disinvestment in transportation. Why Baltimore City is the only school district that does not have a yellow bus service for its students, right? Students are expected to get on an MTA during rush hour. When adults are trying to break their neck to get to school, young people are expected to be on those buses as well, trying to get to school. Baltimore City has never had a yellow bus service. I think there was an attempt to do some things around supporting students in Baltimore City in 1974. So that's the year I was born, 50 years ago. So we don't have the bus passes opportunity, any of that exists for young people anymore. And then I think many folks have talked about as well, the pathways to address mental health. It was amazing to hear how many young people who were talking about the need for mental health services for not only themselves, but for their peers and for their families, right? Really thinking about how do we support the entire family in this mental health space. So are we sending young people back after we've taken care of them? Are we sending them back to places that are going to just do harm to what we've all worked so hard to get them to? So young people are witnessing school violence. They experience judgment and underinvestment from schools and districts, and they feel stifled by the opportunities or the lack of opportunities that are in their schools and norms. And so racism has caused students to believe that they can't get meaningful work in the city, right? That the CTE and the workforce development opportunities that do exist in the city are not pushing them to places where they could be successful, where they feel that it's really creating a pathway to success for them. And if I could change, what would I change? I would try to change the people's mindsets. And so this really speaks to, I think, a lot of what we heard today. What we talk about a lot on my team is really this space where adults have to get. I think that was one place that we did not talk about today. We talked about the things that the state needed to do, that young people need to do, or families need to do, but we didn't talk about what we need to do, right? If we were really doing our jobs, my background is I went to school for social work, right? So if I was doing my job as a social worker, I would really be working my way out of a job. I wouldn't keep seeing the same families. And so when I was a community school coordinator, when I had families that were in need of services around BGE or other bills, I had a pot of funds, but I also had another pot of funds for training and support, right? And so I would tell a family, you got it this month, but I also have these workshops coming up that I need you to get into so that I don't keep seeing you, because we're not here to enable you. We want to get you on your feet. But too many of the opportunities or the systems that we've created don't really get people to a place that they are self-sufficient. It gets them to a place where they still need to be a part of this cycle and this system of need and services, need and services, need and services. And so we want to discern and dismantle the strange fruit that justifies structural or physical violence. We want to acknowledge the resiliency and the agency that students bring to schools. Students need to heal from the intergenerational traumas, and then experts, researchers, nonprofits, school personnel, and anyone else must work together for policies to support teachers, administrators, and students. I'll just let you guys read that slide. I don't think I need to go to that one. And here's another example of what young people are saying that they need and how they feel around being judged and not being supported by the system. I will end with this slide because I think that this has resonated across all of what everybody has kind of talked about, is this space and this safe space for young people to exist. I think that schools have to really think about becoming a place that young people want to be in, right? That there are caring adults, that there are programs and activities that young people want to be a part. We cannot have conversation about young people if we don't include them at the table. We can't make decisions for young people if they're not a part of that decision, that the decision-making process. And so I'll stop there. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. This is great. And I think it it was a nice way to tie a bow on today, the whole way through. Someone, the gaps within the schools and the systems, but then all the way through to if someone becomes justice involved and some of the incongruities there. So I thought this is a great way to kind of tie a bow on that entire discussion. We'll turn to the committee for questions. And I saw Senator Sidnor first, then we'll go to Senator West.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just a couple questions. All right, for our second panel, Maryland State Education Association's panel, Ms. Young, you had mentioned, or you were talking about, I think, unintended consequences for the mandatory school age change. And I was trying to understand, and I think it was on slide 29, but were you suggesting that maybe we needed to relook at that of mandating youth over 16, or I guess it'd be 17 and 18-year-olds from being mandated?
Yes, that
to go
is
to school?
correct. That was the recommendation for the PPWs that I support. They had more options in their toolbox to address some of the low attendance students who felt in limbo. Many times they work with students who have transitioned from one school system or local school systems, that they come into the high school, especially, they come in with one credible service hour and they don't see a clear path to graduation. So what options do they have to meet that child's need?
And as a follow-up to that, I'm curious, in 2018, when I was in the House of Delegates, me and my colleagues, we had passed a law to address, I guess, how the state dealt with truancy for that age group. We reduced from all youth under 18 to youth under, I guess it was youth under 16, so that a parent could not be, I guess, charged, and we gave an affirmative defense for that parent for youth who were 16 and older if they did all they could to get that student into school, that they could use that as a defense if they were prosecuted. I'm curious, would you mind talking to that process of when the state's attorneys kind of come into, and when they're used to enforce some of these truancy laws?
So in my role, I don't specifically take families to court to address the attendancy policy. I support the PPW in finding the students, the families, in trying to address what tools they have to address the absenteeism. From the conversation, in those conversations when we're collaborating on how we're going to address a family, yes, when PPW had the opportunity to take the families to court, it wasn't the intention to be punitive, but it was a resource because they have listened to the school system and still not addressing the need. But when it went to court, they had a second person who was the judge usually advocate for the student's need, and they could hear that from the judges in the court system. So that was the purpose of that law, not necessarily to be punitive for the family members, because most of the families are not incarcerated when they are taken to court with the PPW. It serves a detriment to the family, because once that family parent is serving time, what happens to those students? So they understand the consequences of incarceration, but at the same time, it was a resource that they could use to help address attendance.
Thank you.
Okay.
For Judge Dumais.
Me?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
No, I was just gonna say, I've got an appointment with Delegate Atterbury at 3:30. So if there's any questions that you had of me, I didn't want to just exit to not let you know that I've got to.
You
meet
could
with
just
her.
tell her that you were over in the Senate attending to really important business.
I'll tell her
The
you
House
said
is usually
that.
pretty receptive to that argument.
Yes, yes, yes. Promise it won't be long. Similar question, and I believe you may have been the vice chair when we passed that law in 2018. I'm just curious, in your experience on the court, how often parents may have come who have been prosecuted in Montgomery County under the truancy laws, and
Very seldom.
very seldom.
Yeah,
Okay.
very seldom. I mean, I don't know if you had a different, yeah. It's if very few cases are brought, and if they are, it's really more, I think, as the young woman that just spoke said, is to engage the parents. You know, and maybe there's a small fine, but we're not looking to incarcerate anybody for that, and particularly the older kids.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
And this isn't a question, but it's a statement. I just wanted again, we had a constituent up earlier, Miss Laura Phelps, who is was two of my daughter's principal, and I just wanted to acknowledge that her elementary school is actually my neighborhood elementary school. So I told her if for those out there who may not be fans of education or funding children and all that sort of thing, when you have a principal who's doing what she's doing at a school, it helps your property value. So if you're being selfish, so thank you for leading a school that is now, did you say one of the top 10% of the elementary schools in the state of Maryland?
Yes.
Did I get that right?
Senator Singh,
She was training me
you got
earlier.
it exactly right.
Thank you very much. As advertised. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me, Ms. Fothergill, could you come up first? And while you're doing that, I just want to compliment everybody from this afternoon. It's been a long time since we have had a collection of people who have provided more and better and clearer information to us than the panels this afternoon. It's really been an extraordinary experience. And if anybody's watching on TV right now and didn't have the chance to watch the entire panel, I'd urge you to go back and watch it from scratch. Because from the very beginning all the way through, these panels have been fantastic. So Ms. Fothergill, we had Dr. Webster here yesterday, and the one takeaway that I got from his presentation was one factoid. He had studied 70 people who were shot and seriously wounded in Baltimore at shock trauma. And of the 70 people, 69 of them were high school dropouts. Only one had graduated from high school. So my takeaway was our violence problem in the streets is disproportionately attributable to people who are high school dropouts. And so today we have now studied that pellucidly and at great length. And you seem to know an awful lot about it. Clearly we are not doing enough to prevent absenteeism and then ultimately dropouts in our high schools, particularly in Baltimore City, where according to the statistics we got earlier, 54% of the students are chronically absent. So do you believe that we've enacted this blueprint, which is going to govern us, and it's like all of our eggs in that basket? And the basket's an expensive basket and is going to produce massive deficits the next couple of years. We don't have any more bandwidth to go outside the blueprint and spend more money on education because all of our eggs are in that basket. Are you confident that the blueprint provides sufficient resources to deal with the issues that we have discussed this afternoon, that it's going to solve the problems that we have identified with absenteeism and dropouts?
I think the Blueprint for Maryland's Future is a good faith effort to sufficiently address chronic absenteeism. I do believe that there is room to investigate adequacy. So that is the baseline amount per pupil that is the foundation that every child receives before we layer in the policies and programs that we are funding through the blueprint. And what we did not address as a state when we passed the blueprint for Maryland's future is the baseline foundation amount on a per pupil basis. And I do want to encourage us to fully embrace the blueprint and recognize that since COVID, we may have to explore what that adequacy, what the baseline looks like. So the program's community school strategies is essential to solving this problem. The community school strategies will support, I think, 800 schools once fully implemented, but there are more than 800 schools struggling with chronic absence. Getting to the adult to student ratio that we need in social work, counselors, and other support staff may require additional examination. And I hear that we put all the eggs in our blueprint basket, and I think we have to commit to that and fully fund it, and also be open to exploring where there may be a little bit of additional space that needs to be addressed.
Now,
I can't say that it's
penetrating
fully
your
there.
language, you talk about the need for a little bit, quote, a little bit of additional space.
Mhm.
Do you think if we devoted a little bit more money that we would have solved this problem
I
by the
wouldn't
time the
say-
blueprint is finished?
When I say space, I mean our willingness to explore what the resources need to be. So I think when I'm asking for space, I think it's the open-mindedness to allow us to have a deeper dialogue about what the adequate resources need to be.
Okay, I think I understand what you're saying. And lastly, is Ms. Boast still here? Great. So the teachers' unions collectively in the state were largely responsible for pushing the blueprint. It appears that now, even though we've put all our eggs in that basket, and frankly, we're gonna have a hard time paying for that basket, much less other resources, devoting other resources. Do you feel that it's essential to continue with the blueprint as written if we don't have any money to devote additional resources to these issues that we've discussed today? Or is your organization willing to consider reforming the blueprint to the extent necessary to adequately deal with these issues?
I think it's a false binary choice. We absolutely 100% support the blueprint and still do. I would not be naive to say that we take credit for that. It was a community effort, many organizations and many advocates. What I think you heard today is this isn't just a schooling problem. This is a housing problem. This is a mental health problem. This is a judicial problem, the gaps that are in the judicial problem. So the blueprint addresses the academics, and we, as Ms. Fothergill said, we're past pandemic. We're in a historic educator shortage that we did not foresee. So we have to make gains in that. But I do believe that the blueprint sets us ahead of this issue than any other state that is also dealing with these same concerns. But we need to look at those other parts of our continuum of support that will support education. And yes, we support the blueprint continuously.
Okay, well, let me just finish by asking the same question of you I asked of Ms. Fothergill. Do you think when we're finished with the blueprint at the end of the 10-year blueprint period, that we will have devoted sufficient resources to the issues we've discussed this afternoon to have solved them?
I think we'll be further along. I don't think we hit the finish line because there are so many things impacting what we're doing, but I think we will be further ahead in resolving educational issues and the needs of our students. But again, it's going to take investments in mental health, transportation, housing, food, all of those to help us get to where we need to go. And remember, the blueprint was making up also for the lack of investment that had happened for so many years. So we will have to also continuously reevaluate the cost of education and the cost to our society and workforce if we would neglect education as we did previously.
Thank you very much for your answers.
I'm sorry, I have to vote, but I didn't want to leave, so I'm hoping they'll keep the vote open. I actually had a request, but I first want to clarify something coming from the Education Committee. that it would be a disservice for us to continue a dialogue over the next 85 days, substituting or referring to the blueprint, which is a strategy to achieve and make up for a lack of sufficiently funding our public education system, knowing and also making up for reneging on the first round under Thornton, where we said we were going to fund, and then, you know, something happened, so we rolled back. And guess what? Things got worse. And so there seemed to be a double downing on the funding component and the value of the blueprint. Just want to make it very clear that what we are talking about is not the blueprint for Maryland's future. We are talking about education in Maryland. We are talking about educating Maryland students. The blueprint is one of a number of mechanisms that we use that will provide the architecture, so to speak, for building out our public education system and fulfilling the constitutional requirement to provide an adequate public education system. But I think it would in fact be very helpful for all of us to talk about the thing. The thing is education. So if you ask the question, is educating the children of Maryland worth spending $3 billion over the next 10 years? I think we would say yes. The strategies, might we need to, as we learn from the ground, and our committee actually received some good feedback yesterday about some ways in which the plan, when it's operating on the ground, could use some adjustments. But to be clear, we cannot continue to roll back and renege on the funding components. And also do not confuse the funding components for the operation, the other things of like focusing on attendance, looking at the school to prison pipeline. These are all different initiatives and thoughts that they are not in conflict with each other. So we cannot, I think, as legislators and policymakers, suborn or support a concept where we're saying either we address attendance or we invest in our schools. Either we diversify the teaching population or we provide childcare. These are all things that we know should have been happening 20 years ago. And it is up for us today to ensure that the next generation of legislators will not point to us as reneging on promises that we have made. I'm sorry, sort of like a speech there, but I just really would like to be clear. And then finally on this, I did have a request of the state board. It does seem, because I learned a tremendous amount, and I'll try to report back to my colleagues on education, on EHE, but the issues around attendance, it might be worth for I guess I'm requesting that the state board, I know you have a lot, but requesting that you convene or bring together people over the course of our soon, to see if there are some things that we can do this session to start to address this. I mean, if our best performing schools districts have 20%, under, lack of attendance, that's a problem. And we have some that have half. And I think looking at the 18, I tend not to support these mandatory age things because in some ways they have these unintended consequences. And it seems that children are de facto dropping out, even though the law says you can't drop out at 18. But I suspect if we do the analysis of what percent of children, what percent dropped out at 16 and 17, and what percent are now truant or chronically absent, I would suspect that there is a correlation. So again, thank you so much. I have to go vote, but I look forward to continuing this dialogue.
You really slipped back into JPR mode.
I did.
Isn't that so? It should have been at the end. Okay. All right. I'm sure there's a question in there somewhere. Senator Carter. So actually, just to her point though, that's kind of what this was a convening of folks. We got some ideas. We're going to distill those ideas that you all presented. And so we appreciate that. But Senator Carter, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, perhaps that's what it is, but my questions kind of go to the solutions and those tangible solutions that we can work on this session. So I heard a lot of information. It was good data. I agree with the Senator West that, you know, it was one of the most thorough presentations. I won't do a long thing because we're getting to the end of the day and I don't want to be always the one to hold us here. So my first question is to anyone that wants to answer. I have a second question, which would be to the judges. And so I'll just put them out there and whoever wants to answer can. On all of the truancy information, and we know that the blueprint, you know, we're hearing that, you know, once that's fully funded and up and running, it'll be hopefully adequate to address the truancy issues, to expand the community schools. So this session, I know that there's legislation to expand the resources for community schools. I guess my first point and question is related to that, because I listened to the judges talk about their program, which sounds wonderful, but all I could think was, why does it have to get to the court? Why isn't the school able to do the same outreach and implement the same things without being a need for court? So can anyone answer that? Like all of those wonderful things the judges talked about, why isn't that possible? Is it just that we're not there yet? And is there something that we can do this session to get us there? Yes, whoever wants to take it.
I think a part of it is because many of the cities or counties are coming to community schools at a different time and different point. Baltimore City has been at it for about 10 plus years and has worked its way through some challenges, but is doing really well at supporting families and students prior to getting to truancy court. And Anne Arundel County, the judge that kind of handles truancy court, has created a program called the RAP program. So there are parents and families who may be on the verge or who have even received a subpoena. But what Judge Scott has done is he comes out to a school or to a community place, all those parents will come in, and then he'll bring resource providers, partners, and whoever else that those families seem to may need. And so they have those folks right there in the face. I think that for some folks, I mean, it's about building the relationships and the partnerships to bring to the table. And again, many of the districts are working their way through trying to really understand what community schools looks like, right? Like, so
yet when we deal with this one specific issue of truancy, I would think there would be an ability to focus on that issue and devise a plan and strategy for that school.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, but I think that it looks very different for each district. It looks very different for each school community, right? So I worked in West Baltimore as a community school coordinator, but when I moved to schools in East Baltimore, that strategy and that work looked very, very different. And it just is. And I think that people just have to be flexible and be able to move with the culture and with the culture of their school. But I think that from the start, we have to get the school districts up to speed. And it's not going to look the same in every district, but it has to be something that has to be one cookie cutter piece. And maybe it is around truancy and attendance.
Thank you. Sure.
So that was one thing I was thinking, is to be able to capture this in such a way, because it is going to look very different in different schools and different districts. There's no doubt about it. And each school is staffed differently. And I think that's a part of what we need to probably take a look at as well. Not all schools have across the state, I'm saying writ large, not all schools have a full-time psychologist that's available to them. Not all schools have a full-time, one or more school counselors. Not all schools have a people personnel worker or a social worker, people that can do that outreach to families. When I was sitting here thinking, and to the point about there needs to be some kind of framework, that's something I think the department can step in and provide. In other words, let's meet with the people that are having the lower rates of chronic absenteeism, the higher rates of attendance. What are the best practices that they're putting in play? And then create at least some kind of framework for a school or a district to start looking at, and then starting to kind of plug in, because all schools won't be community schools. There's not the funding for all. So if you're not a community school, we don't want that to be an excuse. Like, I'm not a community school, so I can't do that. So what I would like to offer is that the department work on some kind of guidance piece to districts about, these are the kinds of things that need to be put in play. And these are the things that you need to be thinking about. So when your staffing models come around, these are the kinds of things that you need to be considering. Because that, to me, having been a principal for many years in Maryland, I don't know what I would have done without my pupil personnel worker, my school counselor, my school psychologist in those efforts of outreach to families. And so I'll take that responsibility on to work with my team to provide something around that. But I do think we need to get the best thinking, and I'm so glad Sue's a good friend, because she's done this work nationally, and I think reaching out to those partners will help us be able to put together something that we can distribute to all schools across the state.
Thank you. Does anybody know how much or to what extent suspensions and expulsions feed into the overall truancy matter? And I've had whoever Sue. So, I've had relationships with children who their attendance is sporadic. It might rise level of chronic truancy. I'm not sure. But in the midst of all of this, there's other behavior issues or whatever. So they get suspended. So then they're home for 5 days, then they're back. And it doesn't seem to be a productive way to keep them engaged in the educational process.
So a couple of things. And you raised a good point, because it's not just the suspension, it's also what happens around the suspensions. So suspensions themselves are considered excused absences. So they would be captured in chronic absence. But to your point, if a student is suspended, do we look at the data to say on the day of return, do they come back or not come back? Or do they start to miss more after being suspended, which then could be illegal absences or unexcused absences? And so what's the relationship? So one point I want to say is suspensions are captured in chronic absence. They're not captured in truancy. And the impact of suspension is not clearly understood today. We do have a partner with the Maryland State Department of Education, where we have a researcher who is in the process of looking at years and years and years of attendance data, excused and unexcused and suspension, and we'll be coding that data. And we'll be able to give you a deeper analysis in partnership with MSDE in the near future, probably by June, but I can't tell you exactly right now. So if we look at a population of students have been suspended, can we also look at what other days they've missed and whether those days are more likely to be unexcused? I think is a great question as part of that research project, but I don't think anybody's unpacked it
Can
yet.
you all speed it up? Because we're only here till April. I'm just messing with you. And I have a final question, and it's an important one. So Judge DeMay, and I gotta apologize because the other judge from Montgomery County, Smith, I'm sorry, I didn't remember your name because I haven't had the occasion to be there and be before you, but I really enjoyed your presentation. Both of you, whoever wants to answer, I really liked your information. My question to you, Judge DeMay, you can come up if you want, whoever. Here's my question. So I appreciated the information that you provided, and actually we just had that briefing that you saw, and this issue of treatment came up with one of the state's attorneys who was like, oh, if we could just extend the probation because the young person had not been able to avail themselves of adequate treatment throughout the thing. And I brought up, I think at the hearing, there's nothing for the young people in the juvenile system like akin to drug court, for example, in the adult system. And it is clear to me, it is clear to the chairman, because he's been saying things and shaking his head at all of the discussions. So it's clear that we must do better in the juvenile system with not only drug treatment, that's very important, but also all of the necessary therapies, the mental health therapies and counseling and everything. So my question is, you brought up that period of time when a child is initially detained. and that period from detention until they're put into a placement, if they are. Is it plausible, and how could we do it, that we could mandate an immediate action for these treatment services and therapeutic services at the point of detention? I mean, think about it. If we had adequate services, perhaps there would ultimately be no need or less of a need to put them in a placement. So how would that look, and is that plausible in your opinion?
The secretary is right behind you too, but you talked about this program that he said that when they're in the initial hold, they're getting in-site treatment. I forget the phrase.
Once they get through.
You've
what's
initiated
called-
the secretary is right behind you, but
Oh,
you
is
initiated that
Uh-oh,
initiative.
so I have to be nice.
There you go.
Hello.
He slipped in.
Although I was nice earlier too. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
said I respect
It
this.
was good. It was good stuff. It was good stuff.
The answer is, what happens is they go into now, at least in several of the facilities, what's called a pending placement unit. Once they are on the pending placement unit, they are in fact receiving mental health treatment and services. But what they're not getting is the drug treatment when they are there. And there are ways that one of the ways that I have done this, and I know Judge Smith has done this, there are times, particularly with the waivers, when they are waived down to juvenile. So they've already been sitting in detention many times for months. They're waived. I will try and do not just the adjudication, but the final disposition on the same day. So that the day it's before me, normally you would just do the adjudication and then you set a final disposition out for 30 days. And then it's at the final disposition where they might go then to, the decision is you're going to be pending placement. You're going to go to a placement, you're going to go to pending placement for the moment. But I will sometimes try and do, particularly on the transfers that, they've been sitting already, do the which frustrates some of the DJS caseworkers, because there is a protocol where, and I know that Delegate Carter, you know this, when a youth is transferred from adult to juvenile and comes in, I have a great big thick packet with a psychological report, a social history, and all sorts of things. And I've already got that. Now, it may have been done 2 months earlier before the transfer hearing was done, but what the protocol sometimes is, and I have ignored it to the chagrin of some of the caseworkers, said, they say, well, we can't do the final today because we have to do another social history, which is another nice packet. And I say, I have enough now. We're doing final. Unless clearly counsel for the respondent or the youth or the state has some meaningful objection. So that's one way that I try and fast circuit it. I think it is hard. I think it would be really hard, for instance, if in a case where maybe it's not a transfer, child commits a serious crime, is arrested and is detained, and the adjudication is going to be, in 10, 15, 20 days. Might be hard to get mental health services during that 10 or 15 days because we don't know exactly what they need. There's been no evaluation done. Whereas then when we get to the adjudication or to the social history, unfortunately, it's still 30 days. Your question, I think, is what can be done in that period of time?
So I was wondering if just the mere arrest or detention could trigger an immediate assessment or evaluation.
I wouldn't have a problem with that. You just have to talk to Budget, Tax and Appropriations and make sure that they give Secretary Schiraldi the funds to be able to make sure that he has the services and the mental health professionals available to do it. See, I was supporting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I want to say it. I got a comment on that one, but I'll hold it. Well, you're having some trouble with the pins too, but anyway, further questions from the committee? All right. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. This was a very, very, very good, deep, detailed, and well-rounded presentation. I think it's going to help us a lot when we carry on throughout the session and as we look to legislate around this issue. And we will promise to keep you all in the loop. And if you are willing to, we'd love to re-engage you throughout the session. So thank you all very much and get home safe.